start and then I will read the.
Thank you. First of all, happy Cinco de Mayo. Welcome members, staff, and guests to the May 2021 meeting of the authority. As you all know, we are operating under an executive order which permits us to both to have meetings telephonically as well as teleconferenced. It is necessary that certain elements of that order be read into the minutes. Sarah Richards is going to do that for us. Sarah?
Thank you. As a result of the ongoing public health emergency related to COVID-19, Executive Order 202.1 has been extended to authorize public boards to meet remotely and take action without permitting in-person access to the meetings. The public must have the ability to view or listen to the proceedings. Accordingly, an audio and video recording of today's meeting will be available and upon DASNY's website within 2 days, and a transcript will be posted as soon as practicable. For additional information, you can refer to the DASNY website. And unless there are questions about that, I will read the roll and then turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Our board members present with us today are our board chair, Alfonso Carney, John Johnson, Jonathan Gardner, Beryl Snyder, Joan Sullivan, Janice McKinney, Jerry Romsky, and Tracy Raleigh. We are expecting Wellington Chen to join us later, as well as Adrian Swazerski. For bond council attending, we have Virginia Wong and Vivian Drohan, Melissa Bennett, Karen Kendrick Brown, Eileen Heitzler, Natalia Pearson Farrar, Althea Nanko, and Robert James is on the line as well. For DASNY staff, we have our president, Ruben McDaniel, Paul Koopman, Portia Lee, Kim Ellis, Ricardo Salomon, Jeff Gordon, Deb Fasser, Dave Ostrander, Matt Bergen, Gerard Klauser, Alex Sardine, Maria Carrasco, Caroline Griffin, Diane Filetti, myself, Sarah Richard, Kathy Ebert, Craig Schreivogel, Michael Johnson, Steve Kozier, and Nick Zarelli. I believe I have everyone. Oops, I see Joshua Bonney is on the phone as well. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will turn it back over to you.
Ms. Richards, thank you very much. I've already welcomed the members and the staff and guests to the meeting. I'm going to exercise the chairman's prerogative today and put some things into the minutes, into the transcript. It's an extraordinary day in the authority's, I think, 77-year history. Am I right about that? Correct me later if I'm not. We're here today because of the leadership of Ruben McDaniel. And I'll say more about that later, but we would not be in this room today the way we are, but for Ruben's leadership. So thank you very much for that. It's our first in-person meeting in more than a year. I believe the last one was in March of 2020. And it's exciting to be in this room with board members and staff. Thank you all very much for being here. It's a year, that year is a year which saw the worldwide spread of a viral infection, which has apparently taken millions of lives and continues to kill people. It has affected this year, it has affected the lives of people around the world, and it has disrupted world economies. Through the miracle of electronics and the good graces of the governor of New York, we are able to have our first hybrid meeting, which is to say we are in person in this room, but we have people around New York State, both on the telephone and on TV, who are joining us in order to form a quorum so that we can have this meeting. So it's our first in-person meeting and our first hybrid meeting. The executive order which allows us to do that expires on May 18th. And I don't know whether the governor is going to renew it, extend it. I assume it is more likely that he will, because our next meeting is scheduled for the 19th, and we can't have this kind of meeting if he doesn't extend it. So we'll keep our fingers crossed and assume that happens. This is our first meeting in DASNY's new New York City offices. The space is just extraordinarily beautiful. It really is. It's a beautiful day in this office. The weather didn't necessarily cooperate, but boy, we walked around earlier this morning and it is just a terrific space. The build out was fantastic. Thank you very much for that. We are all here, I think, because of the successful efforts of Ruben McDaniel, whom I've already thanked, Paul Koopman, Steve Curo, former General Counsel Mike Cusack, Acting General Counsel Ricardo Salomon, Stephen Curo, I said, and Peter Jackson, and 100 other DASNY folk who have made this all happen in the midst of one of the most difficult operating periods in business operating periods in US history. And we are very grateful for that. We also have to thank our own member, Jerry Romsky, who chaired the ad hoc real estate committee of the board and who offered his considerable expertise to this effort. The results, Jerry, are magnificent. Thank you. We owe these folk our sincerest thanks and I think a round of applause. Finally, this is our annual meeting, which Sarah reminds me is important to note, which means, among other things, that we have a number of required annual meeting things to consider. The first of these is our first agenda item. So let's have a meeting. Behind tab 1, you will see the roster of officers to be elected. Are there any questions about the resolution as it appears? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve it? Thank you, Jerry. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Carol, thank you very much. Are there any objections to the motion and to the resolution as presented? Hearing none, are there any abstentions? Hearing none, the resolution passes unanimously. The officers are elected. The second agenda item is the transcript of the March 31 meeting. I assume everybody's had a chance to look at it. I have. I think it's accurate and I think it's well done. Thank you all very much. The folk who look at this, thank you for getting that done. Are there any questions about the transcript or any suggestions for revising it? Here, there being none, may I have a motion, please, to approve it?
It's Joan. I make a motion.
Joan, thank you. Jerry, thank you for the second. Okay. I'm sorry. Are there any objections to the motion as presented? Are there any abstentions to the motion as presented? Hearing nothing to either of those questions, the transcript is approved unanimously. Behind tab 3 is the transcript of the March 31st Finance Committee meeting and certain proposed financings. Mr. Romsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Finance met yesterday by way of Zoom after adopting the meeting minutes from the March 31st meeting of the Finance Committee meeting. We advanced to discuss 3 financing. It was EHS Towers LLC financing, the Pitt sales tax financing, as well as the Teachers College financing. After some discussion regarding all of those, including specifically the Pitt sales tax financing, the Finance Committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of those 3 offerings at today's board meeting. And unless there are any other questions or concerns, that concludes my report, Mr. Chair. And thank you very much. And thank you for your leadership in getting us to this point, because you were very much involved in the original process, as I well remember. Sort of seems like, decades ago, but it was only in I guess it was July or August of 2019 when the process started. So, but thank you, and thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership. Thank you.
Jerry,
that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Hearing no questions for Jerry, we will move on to tab 4. And Mr. President, if you will start our discussion.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Behind tab 4 is the St. John's University transaction summary update with Steve Kozer of DASNY presenting, Virginia Wong of Nixon Peabody, and Vivian Drohan, Esquire of Drohan Lee presenting. Steve?
Thank you, Ruben. Good morning, all. The board will recall from the March 3rd, 2021 board meeting, the proposed financing is a combination of various refundings as well as financing up to $90 million in new money projects. The combined not to exceed amount is $365 million. The financing is moving along well. All other approvals, including PACB, TEFRA, and SEEKR, are in place. The bonds received ratings of A3 from Moody's Investors Service and A- from S&P Global Ratings. The working group plans to release the preliminary official statement for the negotiated bonds this evening, and the bonds are expected to price next week. Under the recent information section of the transaction summary update distributed to the members, staff provided an update to the plan of finance. The university expects to enter into private placements with Morgan Stanley as the purchaser for portions of the financing. The Series 2012B and Series 2013A bonds are expected to be refunded as tax-exempt forward delivery private placement bonds. The new money projects and the refunding of the Series 2008B1 and Series 2008B2 bonds are expected to be financed through negotiated sales. And although the Series 2015A bonds will continue to be monitored as a refunding candidate, these bonds are not expected to be refunded at this time. With respect to the forward delivery private placement bonds, the purchaser will execute a forward delivery bond purchase agreement and make upfront payments to the university. The upfront payment represents the net present value savings that would be realized by the university through a forward refunding of the refunded series. The forward delivery bond purchase agreements will give the purchaser the right to purchase the refunding bonds when the bonds to be refunded are eligible for tax-exempt current refunding. And my final update is the university expects to use the upfront payments from the forward delivery bond purchase agreements, which are currently estimated to be combined $10.8 million, as well as the $5 million higher education capital matching grant, or HECAP grant, the university was recently awarded to reduce the amount of bond proceeds used to finance the health sciences building. By reducing the amount of the health sciences building financed with bond proceeds, the university may elect to increase the amount of deferred maintenance projects financed with the proposed bonds, so long as the bonds issued for new money project fund deposits does not exceed the $90 million approved by the university. And I'll now turn it over to Virginia and Vivian to provide an overview of the bond documents.
Thank you, Steve. I'm sorry, Virginia, Vivian, please.
Vivian was going to.
Yeah,
start with-
sorry, I forget to unmute myself sometimes. Okay, I will start. Before you for consideration is the adoption of 5 series resolutions to implement a series of financing for St. John's University. Each series resolution authorizes the issuance of up to $365 million of bonds under the authority's existing general bond resolution adopted for St. John's. While each series resolution authorizes up to $365 million, they each also provide that the principal amount of bonds that may be issued under all of them cannot exceed $365 million in the aggregate. The series resolutions do not limit the discretion of the authority's officers to determine whether to issue the bonds in other configurations than are currently contemplated. They each authorize the authority to enter into a standard bond purchase agreement and forward bond purchase agreement. As Steve mentioned, it is expected that 2 series of bonds may be issued as forward delivery bonds. The university will enter into an agreement to provide continuing disclosure to facilitate the underwriter's securities law obligation. The general resolution provides for the issuance from time to time of multiple series of bonds, each series separately secured from each other, except as otherwise provided in the applicable series resolution. The bonds are special obligations of the authority payable solely out of the revenues which consist of the payments made by the university under the applicable loan agreement. Payment of the bonds, is secured by the pledge and assignment made by the general resolution of the revenues and the monies and investments held in the funds and accounts established by the general resolution and the applicable series resolution.
The authority and the university will execute a loan agreement in connection with each issuance of authorized bonds. Each loan agreement will require the university to make timely payment of debt service on the authorized bonds. Consistent with the guidelines, The loan agreement will contain the appropriate standard document provisions and may include additional security provisions based on market conditions and practices. The university's obligation to make payments under the loan agreement will be a general obligation and is expected to be unsecured. The authority will execute an assignment of the loan agreement at the time of issuance of any authorized bonds. Pursuant to the assignment, the authority will assign all of its rights under the loan agreement to the trustee, other than certain unassigned rights. Unassigned rights generally include the authority's right to indemnification, the right to receive administrative fees and other amounts payable to the authority, and to require the university to comply with its obligations to maintain the tax-exempt status of any tax-exempt bonds. The forward delivery bond purchase agreements provide for the upfront payment by Morgan Stanley to St. John's and establish the conditions for the initial issuance, which is expected to be simultaneous with the delivery of the bonds to be executed currently. My apologies for my dog. The forward delivery agreements also provide for the exercise of the issuance option by Morgan Stanley and the condition for the settlement and delivery of the forward delivery agreements. In order to authorize the issuance of the bonds and the execution of the loan agreement and assignment agreement, you are requested to adopt the 5 series resolutions that are before you. We are happy to answer any questions you may have. Thanks very much.
Steve, Virginia, Vivian, thank you, all three of you. Are there questions for any of those three? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the resolution? Thank you very much, Daryl. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Joan. Are there any objections to the motion as presented, to the resolution as it appears? Are there any abstentions from this vote? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously and the resolution is approved. Virginia, what kind of dog do you have?
A mini golden doodle who is very enthusiastic for his support of the St. John's transaction. So thank you all very much. We appreciate it.
It's good to see you. It's good to have you all with us. Thank you. We'll look forward to having you in this room at some point in the near future.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you.
Sir.
Behind tab 5 is the Interagency Council for Developmental Disabilities, Inc. Transaction summary updates, Gerard Clouser of DASNY, Melissa Bennett, Esquire of Barclay Damon, LLP, and Karen Brown, Esquire of Lewis Monday will be presenting. Gerard?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, DASNY senior staff, and guests. The transaction summary update provided to the members is requesting the adoption of documents for the Interagency Council of Developmental Disabilities. This transaction will include tax-exempt and/or taxable, fixed and/or variable rate bonds in one or more series at one or more times through a negotiated sale and/or a private placement. Updates since the resolution to proceed in March. The original presentation at the resolution to proceed included 8 participants and 29 projects. 1 participant, Daybreak Independent Services, Inc., and 1 project have been removed from the transaction. The transaction now includes 7 participants and 28 projects with 5 pending PPAs. No projects will be included in the pool without a PPA. We've secured the following approvals since the March board. We have the resolution to proceed, the PACB authorization, TEFRA approval, and a seeker completion. We've also received Moody's letter with a rating of AA3 as anticipated. I defer to bond counsel for the document review. Melissa and Karen.
Thanks, Gerard. Good morning. Before you for consideration is a proposed IAC series resolution authorizing up to $40 million of bonds under the IAC general resolution. That resolution authorizes DASNY to issue multiple series of bonds for the nonprofit members of IAC to finance facilities serving people with developmental and other disabilities. DASNY loans the proceeds to 1 or more IAC members with a separate loan agreement for each participant. Each series of IAC bonds is separately secured by the payments to be made by the participants under their respective loan agreements. IAC members receive most of their funding through state agencies, and each member in its loan agreement grants DASNY a security interest and such public funds relating to the facilities financed.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Melissa.
I
Karen?
think, Karen, do you want to?
Sure. The bonds will be separately secured from all other series by the loans to these participants. These loans are not cross-collateralized with or cross-defaulted to any other loans. If a participant defaults on a loan, the default will not constitute a default under the loans made to the other participants. The series resolution also authorizes customary documents for a negotiated public offering of the bonds. Before we open it up to questions, we'll turn it back over to Gerard for final notes.
Okay, and actually I'll jump in quickly, Gerard. Also, I just also want to point out that each project is required to have a PPA, which evidences OPWDD's commitment to pay an amount approximately sufficient to amortize the project's portion of the bonds, subject to state appropriation and operation of the project to state standards. These payments will constitute pledged revenues. Any non-OPWDD reimbursed amounts are anticipated to be paid out of operating revenues. As additional security, DASNY will enter into intercept agreements so that if a participant defaults, OPWDD will make payments as DASNY directs. The participants' loans are also expected to be secured by mortgages, except that for 5 leased facilities, the applicable participants are expected to instead collaterally assign their respective leasehold interest to DASNY, and except that for 1 participant, it will not mortgage its 2 projects located at its campus location. Now we can turn it over to Gerard for one more note.
Thanks, Melissa and Karen. This is on a lighter note. I would just like to mention a documentary film called Crip Camp, which is available on Netflix. The documentary speaks directly to this population of individuals and the struggle they've endured. It is a touching and troubling at the same time. It's a wonderful story about what programs like IAC and NYSARC provide for disabled people. It's a close look at how necessary these programs are, and importantly, the advances that have been made for the disabled community through these bond financings. So, you know, in light of all of the being locked up in COVID, this was a film that I found online, and this is our 15th issuance for the Interagency Council. And through my career at DASNY, I've worked on several NYSARC transactions as well, both of which seem to have issuances almost on an annual basis. So it's a very, it's a great film. If anybody has any spare time, you can see what amazing things these programs do. And Bond Counsel and I are more than happy to answer any questions or concerns that anybody has related to the presentation. Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, Gerard. Several things. First of all, thank you for your presentation, and thank you for the recommendation. This is an extraordinarily important and often not fully recognized community in New York State for its importance. I'm frankly very proud of the work that DASNY has done in the past to support this important community of people. And your work on this is certainly very important as well. Thank you for the recommendation to, is it Crip Cam?
It's Crip Camp. I'll send you a note, CRIP Camp, CAMP.
Okay.
Just a very quick highlight. It's about a summer camp that took place in the Catskills, supposedly run by hippies for crippled, the terminology is not pretty, and they'll tell you all about it. But it was basically an opportunity for disabled people to go away to a summer camp and become human. It's worth a watch.
Really
And
appreciate
Netflix is where to be found.
Appreciate the recommendation. Before we move to a vote too, I want to thank you for taking the time that it must have taken you, probably a considerable amount of time, to school me on the PPA process. I'm very grateful to have that knowledge now. It just helps me to understand how complex these transactions can be. Are there questions for Gerard or for Melissa or for Karen? Hearing none, are there any objections to the motion? I'm sorry, I haven't asked for a motion, have I? May I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction?
Make the motion, Joan Sullivan.
Thank you, Joan. Is there a second? Gerard, thank you very much. Are there any objections to the motion as it has been presented and to the resolution? Are there any abstentions from what I will call this vote? Hearing none, the motion is approved and the transaction has received unanimous approval. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. President.
Thank you. So we now move on to resolutions to proceed with new financings. Behind tab 6 is the EHS Towers LLC staff memorandum with Matt Bergen presenting. Matt?
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, everyone. The staff report provided to the members presents a 19-year term for a bond issue in an amount not to exceed $19 million on behalf of EHS Towers LLC. The financing that you're considering is the partial refunding and restructuring of DASNY's Educational Housing Services CUNY Student Housing Project Insured Revenue Bonds Series 2005. And similar to the recent SUNY Dormitory and FIT Student Housing Corporation transactions, this is being done to provide near-term debt service relief due to the low occupancy rates, which are a result of the pandemic. As described in the report, in 2005, DASNY issued these bonds to finance the construction of a residence hall with approximately 600 beds on the campus of the City College of New York, which is incorporated within the City University of New York system. To provide some background, we originally did a financing with Educational Housing Services, Inc., or EHS, in 2005. And EHS is a not-for-profit corporation formed in 1987 to provide college students with housing in New York City. EHS was added to DASNY statute in 1998, and DASNY statute was further amended in 2008 to authorize DASNY financing not only for EHS directly, but also for its wholly owned corporations or limited liability companies. Subsequent to this amendment, all the rights and obligations of EHS in the project that was financed and all of the related financing documents were assigned to EHS Towers LLC, a wholly owned bankruptcy remote not-for-profit subsidiary of EHS. And this concept of creating a special purpose entity and assigning it all the rights and obligations was disclosed in the 2005 official statement. EHS Towers thereby became the borrower with respect to the Series 2005 bonds, and EHS Towers LLC will also be the borrower with respect to the proposed Series 2021 bonds. The debt service on both the Series 2005 bonds and the proposed Series 2021 bonds is payable from revenues of the project and is non-recourse to both EHS and EHS Towers LLC. To the extent that project revenues are not sufficient to service the debt, CUNY guarantees any shortfalls through the support agreement. We are currently discussing this partial refunding and restructuring of these Series 2005 bonds in the context of providing for 2.5 years of debt service relief, and this amounts to approximately $4.4 million of debt service relief annually. Current thoughts are that the debt service on the proposed refunding and restructuring bonds is anticipated to mature after the 2035 maturity of the 2005 bonds. The partial refunding and restructuring of the Series 2005 bonds does not provide aggregate savings on an NPV basis. When looking at the security features, it is anticipated that the bond issue will be secured by a policy of municipal bond insurance, a leasehold mortgage on the property, an assignment of the student rentals, a debt service reserve fund if required, and most importantly, the support agreement of the City University of New York. And again, to the extent that project revenues are not sufficient to service the debt, CUNY guarantees any shortfalls through this support agreement. The expected ratings are A2, AA. And finally, in looking at the transaction summary, although we have requested flexibility, we are anticipating this to be a fixed rate, taxable, bond insured transaction with the restructuring providing near-term debt service relief due to the low occupancy rates, which are a result of the pandemic. And we are planning to come back to the May 19th special board meeting for the adoption of documents. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. You are joined, I believe, by Eileen Heitzler and Natalia Pearson-Ferrer. No?
Mr. Chairman, that's for the next transaction.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Are there questions for Matt? Hearing no questions, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction?
Move. This is Tracy.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Is there a second? Jerry, thank you for the second. Are there any objections to the motion as presented to the resolution as it appears? Hearing none, are there any abstentions from the vote? Hearing none, the motion is approved. The transaction is approved unanimously.
And I think also, Al, as I think Ruben pointed out yesterday, this was a pretty good effort by the team to sort of bring this transaction to us, right? I mean, this was sort of a COVID related.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Finance Committee Chairman Romsky, the Public Finance Group, led by Portia and Matt, did a great job of reviewing all of our clients around COVID-related challenges they might have with bond issues, and recognized that EHS and CUNY will be facing that situation. And so worked really hard on this transaction, very complicated and not the easiest credit in the world, but really provided some necessary relief because of COVID, so that the university is not worried about these 2 years of debt service.
Congratulations on getting it done, staff.
Kind of steady the ship while COVID sort of.
Yeah.
So thank you.
All right, so we move on to tab 7 on the agenda. The New York State Sales Tax Revenue Bond Program and/or the Personal Income Tax Revenue Bond Program. Mr. President.
Thank you. Behind tab 7, we have the personal income tax, sales tax revenue bond transaction summary being presented by Matt Bergen, Eileen Heitzler of Warwick Harrington at Sutcliffe, and Natalie Pearson Farrar of Golden Holly James, our co-bond counsel. They will be presenting. Matt?
Matt, forgive me for jumping the gun. Just looking at the
Oh,
wrong.
that's quite all right. That's quite all right. And thank you again, Mr. President. The board is being asked to authorize the issuance of multiple series of tax exempt and or taxable, fixed and or variable rate bonds issued at one or more times with a term of 13 years in an amount not to exceed $2 billion under either the sales tax revenue bond program and or the personal income tax revenue bond program. However, at this time, the current plan is to issue under the personal income tax revenue bond program. I want to talk about the fiscal year 2022 budget. And in the fiscal year 2022 budget, it included language authorizing the issuance of state-supported debt to provide for the legal defeasance of bonds issued by the Sales Tax Asset Receivable Corporation, or STAR-C. The state is currently paying an annual payment of $170 million through June 30th, 2034, subject to annual appropriation in relation to these bonds. The state's $170 million annual obligation is to LGAC, or the Local Government Assistance Corporation. LGAC then transfers this $170 million payment each year to the City of New York, which in turn has assigned these monies to pay the STAR-C bonds. Pursuant to language in the budget, the obligation of LGAC to make this $170 million annual payment to the City of New York is terminated once the STAR-C bonds have been defeased. As such, this defeasance of the STAR-C bonds eliminates the state's obligation to make this $170 million annual payment to LGAC. The fiscal year 2022 budget also included language authorizing the issuance of state-supported debt for the purpose of refunding DASNY's secured hospital bonds. And the state is currently paying the debt service on the secured hospital bonds through the state service contracts. So to sum it up, we are seeking authorization for the bonds to be issued for the following purposes: the legal defeasance of the Sales Tax Asset Receivable Corporation's Sales Tax Asset Revenue Bonds fiscal 2015 series, and the termination of the state's $170 million annual corresponding obligation. In addition, we are seeking authorization for the refunding of DASNY's Secured Hospital Revenue Refunding Bonds, North General Hospital, Series 2003, DASNY Secured Hospital Revenue Refunding Bonds, Interfaith Medical Center, Series 2007, and or DASNY Secured Hospital Revenue Refunding Bonds, Wyckoff Heights Medical Center, Series 2015, and the termination of the state service contracts. In discussing security, under the Sales Tax Revenue Bond Program, the security includes semi-annual payments to be made pursuant to the financing agreement between DASNY and the Division of the Budget. Also, a set aside of 2 cents or 50% of the state's 4% sales tax pursuant to statute and deposited in the Sales Tax Revenue Bond Tax Fund. An additional 1 cent for a total of 2 cents is now available to be dedicated since the obligations of the Local Government Assistance Corporation were satisfied on April 1st of 2021. Under the personal income tax revenue bond program, again, semi-annual payments to be made pursuant to the financing agreement between DASNY and the Division of the Budget. And current legislation provides for 50% of the receipts from the New York State personal income tax and employer compensation expense tax, with 50% of such receipts deposited in the revenue bond tax fund. In addition, legislation authorized as part of the enacted budget provides that 50% of the receipts from imposition of the pass-through entity tax pursuant to Article 24A of the tax law shall be deposited into the revenue bond tax fund. This is expected to be revenue neutral to the state. However, PIT receipts or personal income tax receipts would decrease to the extent that qualifying entities elected to pay this tax. So to hold the revenue bond tax fund harmless and to maintain comparable security, 50% of the receipts of this tax would also be deposited into the revenue bond tax fund. For the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022, this fiscal year, the debt service coverage on all outstanding sales tax bonds is projected to be 5.1 times total debt service, and the debt service coverage on all outstanding state personal income tax bonds is projected to be 5.6 times total debt service. And again, the debt service coverage on the sales tax bonds reflects the increased deposit to the sales tax revenue bond fund from 1 cent to 2 cents as prior obligation of the LGAC were satisfied on April 1st, 2021. And finally, the proposed bonds are expected to be rated AA2, AA+, and AA+. And Mr. Chairman, I would now like to hand the presentation over to Eileen and Natalia. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. So Matt has described the recently adopted statutory authorization for the Series 2021-2 bonds, the purpose for which the bonds are to be issued, the security for the Series 2021-2 bonds, and certain other terms. So we're going to try not to repeat much of what he's already presented. He's given a full presentation. The focus of our co-bond council presentation will be on the supplemental resolutions and the authorizations and delegation of authority contained therein. We request that the board adopt supplemental resolution 2021-2 under the authority's state personal income tax revenue bonds general purpose general bond resolution, and a similar supplemental resolution 2021-2 under the authority's state sales tax revenue bonds general bond resolution. Matt has described the security provided for PIT and for sales tax revenue bonds, as well as recent changes in the taxes that support each of these programs. Each supplemental resolution authorizes one or more series of PIT or sales tax revenue bonds to be issued to finance the purposes authorized under the fiscal year 2022 Budget Act, which were described by Matt, as well as to fund the debt service reserve fund and or to pay the cost of issuance, including to fund the payment of a portion of the interest payable on the Series 2021-2 bonds. A series of the Series 2021-2 bonds may be issued as either tax exempt or taxable. With that, I'll hand it to Natalia.
Good morning. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I got a new webcam, so just wanted to make sure.
Thank you.
The principal amount of Series 2021-2 bonds authorized to be issued by one supplemental resolution may not exceed $2 billion in the aggregate. So in other words, when the amount issued thereunder is combined with any amount issued under the other supplemental resolution. Each supplemental resolution authorizes an authorized officer of the authority to determine the terms of the Series 2021-2 bonds and the sale thereof, subject to the parameters and limitations described by Matt and contained in co-bond counsel's letter to the board, including the principal amount of each series issued, which is subject to the $2 million maximum, the redemption provisions and the maturity provisions, which are subject to the condition that no Series 2021-2 bond may mature later than 13 years from its date of issuance, and the condition that the final maturity of any Series 2021-2 bonds issued for the purpose of refunding outstanding bonds cannot exceed the fiscal year of the final maturity of the outstanding bonds being refunded, considered in the aggregate. Each supplemental resolution also authorizes an authorized officer to prepare and distribute or execute any documents, agreements, or other instruments that may be necessary, convenient, desirable, or appropriate in connection with the sale and issuance of the Series 2021-2 bonds and the effecting of the purposes of the Series 2021-2 bonds, including one or more preliminary and final official statements, one or more bond purchase agreements, and a continuing disclosure agreement. Each supplemental resolution also authorizes an authorized officer to take any actions and do all things necessary, convenient, or desirable in connection with the sale and issuance of the Series 2021-2 bonds and the effecting of the purposes of the Series 2021-2 bonds. So that concludes our kind of high-level overview of the financing and the supplemental resolutions. And we are here if you have any questions. And I will turn it back over to you, DASNY.
Thank you very much, Natalia. And thank you, Matt, Eileen, and Natalia for the presentation. Are there questions for any of the three from the members?
I skipped a little, still confused on that whole, how the city, the 170, how the city and the 170 sort of million gets sort of, how does that like fit in? It just confused me. I feel probably more for Matt than for bond counsel.
Yeah, I can go back over that. So let me just go back over here. The state is currently paying an annual payment of $170 million through June 30th, 2034. This is subject to annual appropriation. And the state's $170 million annual obligation goes to LGAC, or the Local Government Assistance Corporation. LGAC is to transfer this $170 million payment each year to the city of New York, which in turn has assigned these monies to pay the Star C bonds. So that is in essence the way the pass-through works. Right, from the state to LGAC to the city to pay the Star C bonds.
It's the pass-through that makes it a bit difficult. At least it did initially for me to understand. I think I got it now. Thank you very much for that, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
Are there other questions for Matt or for Eileen or for Natalia? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Thank you very much, Beryl. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you very much, John Gardner. Appreciate it. Are there any objections to the motion as presented, the resolution as presented? Hearing none, are there any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion carries, the resolution passes unanimously. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
Chairman, behind tab 8 is the Teachers College transaction summary with Dave Ostrander of DASNY, Alethea Naku of Squire Patton Boggs, and Natalie Pearson Farrar of Golden Holly James will be presenting.
Good morning, everyone. The board is being asked to adopt the necessary documents for the issuance of up to 2 series of tax-exempt and/or taxable fixed and/or variable rate bonds in an amount not to exceed $64 million on behalf of Teachers College. Proceeds from the proposed issuance are expected to be used to refund all or a portion of the college's Series 2012A and 2012B bonds, totaling an estimated $48.7 million. An additional $10 million in bond proceeds will fund certain new money projects, such as roof repairs and replacement, classroom renovations, and general deferred maintenance located at the college's campus buildings. The bond issuance is expected to be structured as one series of tax-exempt fixed-rate bonds. Since the 2012 A and B bonds are not callable until July 1st of 2022, the college will likely choose to utilize a forward delivery where the bonds will be sold as early as June of 2021 and close on or after April 2nd, 2022, when the issuance would qualify as a current refunding. While this would result in a forward yield premium, the forward delivery will allow the college to issue tax-exempt refunding bonds while taking advantage of current interest rates. Again, although this transaction is expected to be structured as one series of tax-exempt fixed-rate bonds, we're asking the board to adopt 2 series resolutions in the event the college chooses to utilize taxable bonds or to issue new money bonds separately. The refunding is being done for savings, assuming current market conditions, a total net present value savings in the range of 8.8 million or 18.5% of the refunded bonds is expected. Teachers College is rated A1 from Moody's and A+ from S&P, both with a stable outlook. And in accordance with DASNY's financing guidelines, this will be a general unsecured obligation of the college. Some additional information on Teachers College. DASNY has been issuing bonds for Teachers College going all the way back to 1970, issuing a total of 275.5 million over that time. The college continues to maintain its reputation as one of the leading graduate schools of education in the nation, which is enhanced by its affiliation with Columbia University. Student demand is reflected in steady annual applications, averaging 7,190 over the last 5 years, and a consistently high matriculation ratio that has averaged nearly 51%. The college has remained selective with an average acceptance rate of 53.7% over 5 years. And overall FTE enrollment has been consistent over 5 years, averaging 3,429 students. Teachers College has posted operating surplus in 4 of the last 5 years, averaging 1.2 million annually. And lastly, Teachers College has experienced a steady increase in cash and investments over the last 5 years. Total cash and investments to operating expenses increased from 1.6 times in fiscal year 2016 to 2.2 times in fiscal year 2020. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Alethea and Natalia to discuss the documents.
You guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. I think we can hear you now.
Okay, excellent. I played around with my mute button a little bit too much. Thank you very much. Thanks, Dave. The proposed Series 2022 bonds are being issued pursuant to the authority's Teachers College General Resolution and 2 series resolutions. We're calling them 2022 bonds because of the forward advanced nature of this transaction. The general resolution, which was adopted in 2008, provides for the issuance from time to time of multiple series of bonds and an unlimited principal amount for the college. Bonds may be issued to finance or refinance the cost of one or more projects, pay the costs associated with the issuance of bonds, pay or provide for the payment of outstanding notes or bonds issued for the benefit of the college, fund any reserve requirements if necessary, and establish for a particular series of bonds, and to exchange bonds issued under it. Each series of bonds issued pursuant to the general resolution is separately secured by the funds and accounts established pursuant to the specific series resolution authorized by its issuance. The bonds of each series will be special obligations of DASNY payable solely from the money in which the funds and accounts are attributed, and by the loan repayments made by the college pursuant to the loan agreement executed in connection with the particular series. The general resolution does not require security for the college's obligations, but instead provides the college the ability to secure the obligations by mortgages or other security interests as may be required in connection with the sale and delivery of the specific series of bonds. Under the proposed loan agreement for this transaction, it is anticipated that the college's obligations will not be secured by a pledge of any of the college's specific revenues or a mortgage on real property, or in other words, the repayment obligations of the college will be a general unsecured obligation of the college. The general resolution does not establish a debt service reserve fund. However, it provides that one may be established for bonds if required when issued, and that would be pursuant to the applicable series resolution. No debt service fund is expected to be established for the Series 2022 bonds. Now, turning to the series resolution briefly, we anticipate that all of the Series 2022 bonds will be issued as tax-exempt, unenhanced fixed-rate bonds, priced and sold pursuant to a public offering. However, in order to provide the flexibility that Dave just mentioned, we've structured it so that we're authorizing 2 series of tax exempt and or taxable bonds or a combination thereof at 1 or more times pursuant to the series resolutions, just to provide the flexibility. The series resolution delegates to various officers of the authority the ability to determine the terms of the series 2022 bonds, including the principal amount of the series 2022 bonds issued, provided that the aggregate principal amount should not exceed 64 million. The final maturity of the bonds may not mature later than 30 years after being issued, and the redemption date and redemption price of the bonds may be the principal amount of the bonds plus accrued interest, or alternatively, the redemption price may be determined by a formula which is intended to make whole the holders of bonds. The authorized officers of the authority are also authorized to determine any other provisions deemed advisable and not in conflict with the provisions of the general resolution or the series resolutions, and to execute all documents and do all other things necessary or convenient in connection with the issuance of the bonds. Now I'll turn it over to Natalia to discuss the loan agreement and the forward delivery nature of the transaction.
Thank you. As Alethea mentioned, the authority and Teachers College will execute a loan agreement in connection with the issuance of the Series 2022 bonds. The loan agreement will require Teachers College to make payments in amounts and at times sufficient to make timely debt service payments on the bonds. The loan agreement will also require Teachers College to make payments sufficient to pay the fees, costs, and expenses of the authority and the trustee or any paying agent with respect to the bonds. The loan agreement and the obligation of Teachers College to make payments under it are general obligations of Teachers College. The obligations are complete and unconditional, and the amount, manner, and time of making such payments cannot be decreased or delayed. Consistent with DASNY's financing guidelines, the loan agreement will contain the appropriate standard document provisions and may include additional security provisions based on market conditions and practices. Teachers College's obligations under the loan agreement are not expected to be secured by a mortgage on or security interest in any other property of Teachers College. Now, Dave and Alethea both spoke about the forward delivery structure of this financing. And as they mentioned, it is anticipated that DASNY and Teachers College will enter into a forward delivery bond purchase agreement for the sale of the bonds, with B of A Securities Incorporated as the borrower. While a standard bond purchase agreement contemplates a bond pricing and subsequent issuance of the bonds within a short time frame, in a forward delivery bond issuance, the underwriter agrees to price and contract to purchase the bonds on an initial closing date and to take delivery of the bonds at a final settlement date, subject to compliance with certain conditions outlined in the forward delivery bond purchase agreement. Forward delivery bonds come with a premium because of the underwriter's commitment to purchase the bonds at a future delivery date, but offer the benefit of a hedge against interest rate risk, which allows sophisticated issuers like DASNY to lock in savings. The Series 2022 bonds are expected to be priced and initially close in late June of this year, and to be issued, delivered, and settled on or after April 2nd of next year, all pursuant to a forward delivery bond purchase agreement to be entered into with the underwriter. At the initial closing, preliminary conditions for the issuance and future delivery of the Series 2022 bonds are expected to be satisfied, and a document closing will be held. Upon the confirmation of certain conditions being met, the bringing down of certain representations of Teachers College, and the delivery of certain documents, certificates, and opinions, the underwriter will be obligated to take delivery of and pay for the Series 2022 bonds on the settlement date. And that's the end of our presentation. So if you have any questions about the series resolutions or the forward delivery mechanics or any of the financing technicalities of the transaction, then please let us know, and we'll be here for any questions you have. And I'll turn it back over to you at DASNY.
Thank you very much, Natalia.
And if I may, Mr.
Yes, of
Chairman,
course.
just one point of clarification. Bank of America is the underwriter for this transaction.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, David. Alethea, it's good to have you and Squire back with us. It's good to see you. Thank you. Natalia, you've done double duty today.
Yes.
Make sure that Robert is aware of that. Robert James. And if he's on the phone, Robert, if you're not on the phone, then I'm wasting my words here, but if you are, thank you.
Here.
He's here.
I'm here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for acknowledging me.
It's good to have you with us, Robert.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Are there questions for David, Alethea, Natalia, and even Robert? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please? Well, before I ask for the motion, I should probably disclose that my wife has recently commenced a graduate program at Teachers College. I've inquired counsel as to whether or not a recusal might be necessary here. It is thought that her Teachers College work is so remote from this transaction that the recusal isn't necessary, just for the record. Now, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction?
Ennis McKinney, I so move.
Thank you very much. So the second is?
Joan Sullivan?
Joan, thank you very, very much. Are there any objections to the financing, the motion as presented? Are there any abstentions from the vote? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously and the transaction is approved. That is our last financing activity for the day. Before we go on to the president's report, I have a minor comment to make here. Either late last week or early this week, a very important publication in New York State called City and State published its 50 men and women in New York State who were most influential in supporting MWBE contracting, 50. Our president was named prominently on that list. And I want to say congratulations to you. Great work.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I'm on calls all the time where people say that's a great question. I know it's just because my position was a great question. Similarly, this award is because of the great work that DASNY does, not because of my great work. And all the staff here has taken the MWB very seriously. The board obviously is supportive of that. Michael Clay and his group have done a great job of making sure we effectuate that. So I want to thank all of them because, again, but for them,
thank you.
I would not be on this list.
Thank you for doing that.
And it goes back a long way also, Al. I think really starting as you, when you became chairman, as well as your two predecessors as well, were big firm advocates, especially dealing, and what you see today, actually, the benefits of that sort of foresight and guidance on that. So thank you.
We're very fortunate for it. We're very fortunate. DASNY's doing a great job.
You can accept the award.
I'm glad I said the chair to accept the award, absolutely.
Because they'll blame you for everything else, so you might as well take it.
Might as well get a good one. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that recognition. I really do. On a poignant note, we lost a family member between last board meeting and this. Charlie Fernandez, the daughter of Jason Fernandez, who's a team member of ours, lost her battle with cancer. And she was an inspiration to all of us. A lot of us contributed to help the family through the situation. This summer, we're going to have an in-person event outside at some point. We'll dedicate a tree to Charlie and put it on our 515 Broadway office building. I just wanted the board members to know that we're sad to lose Charlie and thoughtful of Jason and his family during this period, this difficult period of time.
Thank you. Thank you for letting us know. And please offer the board's condolences to the family.
Yeah, that's
all right.
On a brighter note, Alex Sardine was a fellow of ours a few years ago. He left us and went to Siebert. Suzanne Shank, who runs that firm, is a good friend of mine, is very upset with me now because I stole him back. And he is now in the DASNY Public Finance Group. So we're glad to have Alex with us as we build our public finance team out and try to bring some young folks in who can really be the future of DASNY Public Finance. So Alex is with us today. Alex, do you want to say hello to the board?
Thank you, Mr. President. It's great to be back at DASNY and great to see all the familiar faces again. Good to see you again, Mr. Chairman.
Alex, it's great to have you with us. You may be the only pilot on the DASNY staff.
You have a great memory, Mr. Chairman.
No, I think it's a feather in your cap. And congratulations on coming back to DASNY. I think it's a tremendous move, and I'll keep my fingers crossed and hope that you just do everything you've got to do for just wild success here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. The other thing I want to do before I get into my budget review is just thank some of the people who really helped put this together today that don't get sung often.
Thank you. Great idea.
Iris Ramirez, Miriam Barrero, Jason Davis, Natasha Jackson, and McLean McCrae, Max Squared, as we call him. All were very instrumental just getting us here today logistically, set up the socially distance, the safe lunch, all those things. I just want to thank them. They don't get called out very often, but they do a great job in making it all work well. So I want to thank them. And then also we found in our procurement area a young African-American lawyer, Morgan Rowland, who've now moved to our general counsel's office. And she has a twin sister whose name is Megan Rowland. And Megan is a young caterer in New York. And so she'll be providing lunch for us today.
All right.
So keep it in the family. As long as we're spending the money, we might as well keep it in the family.
Congratulations.
So you'll get a chance to meet Megan at some point this afternoon. With that, the state of New York did pass its budget, as we all know, about $212 billion officially. Was passed on April the 7th. The state revenues were increased by about $3.5 billion from additional taxes that were found. And also we received around $12 billion of money from the American Rescue Plan. So the budget is much more robust than one might have anticipated if we had not had some of those that fortunate work. In the budget, there's about $311 billion worth of infrastructure. Included in that is the $750 million Wadsworth Lab transaction or building we've talked about many times. It's the DASNY program. We're waiting to get direction from DOH and DOB on that. We also saw in the budget $100 million for SUNY and CUNY for additional capital projects, some of which we will benefit from. So looking forward to that. It authorized DASNY to issue $3 billion of short-term financing and $2 billion of credit facilities to the extent the state wants to do that again this year. Recall last year we helped with some cash flow needs of the state through short-term borrowings. They're not declared to do that yet, but they wanted to have the flexibility in the budget to do that. Our Star C transaction, the PIC transaction was approved as part of the budget. They also extended our design build for DEC, that's Department of Environmental Conservation, and Office of Parks and Rec. So that's been extended for 2 years. We're glad to see that. We have two additional proposals that continue to go through the legislature. One is the BICFA bond cap increase. We feel very good about that. We've got a couple good sponsors in the assembly. We're working through that. We also continue to have our expanded authority authorization for not-for-profits. We're less optimistic about that being approved, but certainly have that on the table as well. So all in all, when we went into a budget season tense about what it might have been, we feel much better now coming out of the budget season and where we are. Also in the budget, they reinstated the 2% COLA for all union workers at the state level. And of course, we follow suit at DASNY. So all of our union employees have received their 2% COLA. We're waiting for our MC employee from the Department of Budget, our MC employee guidance. So we'll look for that.
That's great news, Ruben.
So yeah, so all good news out of the budget. Like I said, between the CARES Act and the revenues not being as bad as they thought they might be from a state perspective, and a little bit of additional revenue from a couple of additional tax sources, we're certainly in better shape now than we would have anticipated being going into this budget season. So feel very good about all of that. We've also spent a lot of time the past month or so reaching out to our financial advisors. Portia and I, as you know, reached out to our underwriters a while back. Financial advisors on the list. That outreach has been excellent. And so we feel very good about that. With that, I'll turn over to Portia for a quick market update. And then I'll turn over to Steve for construction update. Portia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Just an update on the financings. We're actually in the market today with the St. Lawrence Lewis BOCES financing. Just briefly on the market, new issue volume has totaled roughly $145.4 billion to date. That's up almost 14% from this time last year. This week's total supply is expected to be about $9.4 billion. So good supply for the week. Tax exempt bond yields were slightly lower on Tuesday, yesterday. 10-year AAA MMD yield decreased by 1 basis point, and the 30-year AAA MMD decreased by 2 basis points to 0.99% and 1.57% respectively. On the US government bond yield side, the 10-year Treasury decreased by 2 basis points to yield of 1.61%, and the 30-year Treasury decreased by 3 basis points to 2.27%. Municipal bond funds have reported inflows for the week ending April 30th after reporting inflows for the previous week as well. Since the March 31st board meeting, the 1-year MMD rate has remained the same. The 10-year MMD decreased by 13 basis points and the 30-year MMD decreased by 18 basis points. In that same time period, the 10-year Treasuries decreased by 12 basis points, and the 30-year Treasury has decreased by 11 basis points. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Before we move on to Steve, we're requesting the board do a special meeting in May. Please review a couple of transactions will be at that meeting on May 19th.
So as Matt had indicated, we're going to do the come back for Educational Housing Services, EHS Towers, LLC, for the adoption of documents. And we're expecting to have probably 3 transactions for resolution to proceed for various of our private clients.
Thank you, Portia. Mr. President, for that meeting, I know that you have very important duties on that date. My question really is, will we plan for that meeting to be entirely remote, that is telephonic and Zoom driven, or will there be people who might choose to be here?
Yeah, for that meeting, we'll have it fully remote.
Okay.
Via Zoom. We also have a finance committee meeting the day before on the 18th.
Yes.
That evening as normal, also via Zoom. And then there's a small category, a small world category. Portia's daughter is also graduating that morning in person. So
congratulations.
Portia and I will be enjoying that. But we'll do all virtual.
Thank you.
We will assess our June 23rd meeting. We'll do some hybrid at least. And
okay,
depending on what the guidance is, we'll determine more.
And we'll take your guidance on the guidance. Thank you.
Mr. Curl, can you please give us a construction report?
I can. Can you hear me down there? Just quickly, a couple of project updates. I'll start with the Javits Center expansion project. LLT, the design build contractor, continues to progress toward a DASNY issued TAO. DASNY's been on site for the past couple of months, performing observation, inspection, and testing. Our consultants continue to perform inspections as well, and we recently completed a pre-test for the fire alarm system for the expansion. The design build contractor's target TAO date was this past Monday, May 3rd. However, due to a number of outstanding TAO required items that are not complete at this time, the facility TAO remains outstanding for the expansion project. Moving on to Moynihan Station, as was mentioned, the train hall is open. However, DASNY's code compliance staff is fully engaged in the Facebook tenant fit out. Work is advancing on floors 1 through 5 for that fit out. Quickly on to FIT and Lehman School of Nursing. Both projects are advancing from deep foundation construction standpoint. Both foundations for those 2 projects are scheduled to complete either late this year or early 2022. Quickly on to SUNY, we do have 12 summer projects, either left over from summer of 2020 or new to DASNY that will advance during the summer of 2021 this year. Total project value is approximately $15 million. We do have 1 capital project, SUNY Alfred's Mackenzie Hall, Phase 3, that's currently under construction. and 2 projects from summer 2020 capital projects at SUNY Oswego, Fennell Hall, and SUNY Poly Hillside Hall do have punch list work that will finish up this summer. We got some good news yesterday from SUNY Cortland. The Smith Casey Tower renovation project that had Casey Hall finishing last summer, and Smith Hall was supposed to start last December of 2020. That was put off. We did get news that they do want to start that second tower renovation beginning this December of 2021, which is good news. Just a couple other quick notes. Our construction division is undergoing a reorg for our upstate design and construction organization. The 2 split groups, design and construction, will merge under 3 chiefs in a regional format, and those chiefs are being recruited for this time. Just a quick shout out to Sandy Dagler, our design director for Upstate PDQA. She announced her retirement. She'll be leaving effective June of this year. Sandy will certainly be missed, as her contributions to Upstate design over the years were numerous. And lastly, on the PM web front, our implementation team continues to work on the transition from our current project management system, contract manager, to PM web. The team is deep into configuration of PM functionality and functionality related to commitments and change management. The team continues to push toward an August live date. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Are there questions from the members for Steve? Got a lot going, Steve. Hang in there.
Thankfully, he has a lot going.
Thankfully, he has a lot going.
Thank you, Steve. And finally, as you know, we are in the midst of our annual audit, which will be presented to the board for June 23rd. Kim Ellis, do you have any updates you want to give from the finance office? Kim?
Yes, thank you, Ruben. Staff are diligently working to meet all the deadlines for the financial statement audit. KPMG is performing 100% of the work remotely, as they did last year, with assistance of internal audit staff. As far as the standing financial report, unless anyone has any specific questions regarding the report, it stands as presented. It represents preliminary results for March, as staff are still booking entries to allocate expenses and book accruals. And as Ruben noted, we have paid a 2% COLA to CSEA and UAW represented staff that was previously withheld. We booked an accrual to include that in the financial results for this fiscal year, and more detailed information on results for the fiscal year will be provided in connection with the audited financial statement presentation next month. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Kimberly. Are there questions for Kimberly? Audit-related questions as the audit progresses? Hearing none, Mr. President.
That concludes my president's report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before I ask whether there is any further business to come before this board, I believe that was our last agenda item. Yes. I want to alert the members that we have 2 brief subsidiary meetings after this meeting, and during which we will probably take agenda items a bit out of order. Is there any other question, any other business to come before this board? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to adjourn the meeting? Jerry, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you very, very much, Joan. Are there any objections to adjourning the meeting? Are there any abstentions from that vote? Hearing none, we stand adjourned.